He survived 100 days in the deadliest winter battlefield. The shot didn't echo. It cracked once, sharp, clean. And then the forest went silent again. Snow was falling slowly through the trees, covering the branches, the rocks, the uniforms, the footprints. Everything was white. Everything looked still. 600 meters away, a soldier collapsed into the snow. For a few seconds, nobody moved. Nobody knew where it came from. There was no flash, no smoke, no silhouette between the trees, just silence. And that was the most terrifying part. Because in this battlefield, danger didn't always come from what soldiers could see. It came from what they couldn't. Somewhere in the frozen forest, hidden beneath the snow, there was a man waiting. His name was Simo Häyhä, but the men who feared him would remember him by another name, the White Death. The Soviet Union moves into Finland with overwhelming force. On paper, the situation seems almost impossible for Finland. The Soviet army has more soldiers, more tanks, more artillery, more aircraft. They are pushing into a much smaller country, across frozen roads, dark forests, and snow-covered fields. But the war does not unfold the way many expected, because Finland is not an open battlefield. It is not wide plains and clear roads. It is forests, lakes, deep snow, freezing wind, long nights, and silence. The temperature drops far below zero. Metal sticks to skin, engines freeze, weapons jam, boots sink into snow, and every movement becomes harder than it should be. For soldiers unfamiliar with this environment, the forest feels endless. There are no obvious lines, no clear front, no easy way to know where the enemy is. A road can look empty, a tree line can look peaceful, a snowbank can look harmless. And then, suddenly, everything changes. A patrol moves forward, one man falls, then another. The soldiers look around, searching for the source, but there is nothing. No enemy charge, no shouted command, no visible position. Only the snow, only the trees, only the feeling that somewhere nearby, someone is watching. This is where the battlefield becomes psychological, because fear is not always caused by loud explosions. Sometimes fear grows in silence. When soldiers don't know where danger is coming from, every shadow becomes suspicious. Every tree becomes a possible hiding place. Every quiet moment becomes a threat. And in the Finnish winter, silence was everywhere. Simo Häyhä was not the kind of man people usually imagine when they think of military legends. He was not a loud commander, he was not a famous officer, he did not come from elite military schools. Before the war, he was a farmer, a hunter, a quiet man from rural Finland. He had spent much of his life outdoors, walking through forests, reading tracks in the snow, understanding weather, understanding distance, understanding how animals move, pause, listen, and disappear. To most soldiers, the frozen forest was hostile. To Simo, it was familiar. He knew how snow changed under different temperatures. He knew how sound traveled through trees. He knew how movement revealed a person long before the person became visible. And this mattered. Because in winter warfare, survival is not only about strength, it is about patience, awareness, discipline, and the ability to become part of the environment. Simo was not trying to dominate the forest. He understood it. That was his advantage. While others fought against the cold, he worked with it. While others left tracks, he avoided them. While others made noise, he stayed quiet. And while others looked for a target, he had already seen them first. Most people assume that a sniper needs a scope. It makes sense. A scope gives magnification. It helps with distance. It allows the shooter to see more clearly. But Simo Häyhä made a choice that seemed unusual. He used iron sights. No scope, no glass, no magnified optic. And at first, that sounds like a disadvantage. But in the Finnish winter, it gave him several important advantages. First, no reflection. A scope has glass, and glass can reflect light. Even a tiny reflection across a snowy field can reveal a position. In a world where everything is white, bright, and reflective, the smallest flash can betray a hidden soldier. Iron sights did not create that problem. No lens, no shine, no sudden signal. Second, a lower profile. When using a scope, a shooter often has to lift his head slightly higher. Not much, but in combat, not much can be enough. A raised head, a different shape in the snow, a line that doesn't belong, a small movement above the surface. That can be seen. Without a scope, Simo could stay lower, closer to the ground, closer to the snow, less visible, less exposed. Third, reliability. Extreme cold changes everything. Moisture freezes. Glass can fog. Metal becomes difficult to handle. Complicated equipment becomes less dependable. But simple tools often survive harsh conditions better. Iron sights were simple, direct, reliable, and Simo trusted them. This was not about rejecting technology. It was about choosing the right tool for the environment. In another place, under different conditions, a scope might have been better. But in this forest, in this snow, in this war, simplicity helped him remain invisible, and invisibility was everything. What made Simo Häyhä effective was not only his rifle, it was everything around it. His position, his movement, his breathing, his patience. his understanding of how small details can reveal a person. In deep snow, every action leaves evidence: a footprint, a disturbed branch, a patch of loose powder, a darker spot where snow has been moved, a breath cloud in the freezing air, a sound that travels too far. Most people notice the big things. Simo noticed the small ones. Before taking position, he prepared the snow around him. He packed it down in front of his rifle. This helped prevent loose powder from rising or shifting when he moved. It also helped reduce visible disturbance. In a white battlefield, even a small puff of snow could draw attention. A tiny movement could be enough. He understood that the forest was watching him as much as he was watching the forest. Then there was breathing. In freezing air, every breath creates a cloud. That cloud can linger, it can rise, it can move against the background. And in a still forest, that can reveal life. So he controlled it, he minimized it, he kept it low. He understood that even something as natural as breathing could become dangerous. Then came stillness, and this may have been his greatest weapon. Not speed, not aggression, stillness. Most people can stay still for a moment, but staying still for long periods, in freezing temperatures, while under threat, is something else entirely. The body wants to move, the muscles get tired, the cold bites into the skin, the mind becomes restless. But Simo could wait, and wait, and wait, until movement around him became obvious. Because when one person is completely still, the person who moves first reveals himself. That is the cruel logic of winter warfare. The impatient man becomes visible, the careful man survives. He did not need to chase, he did not need to rush. The battlefield came to him, and when it did, he was already prepared. Part 5. The psychological effect, 10:40 to 12:30. Over time, something began to happen. The effect was not only physical, it was psychological. Positions that seemed safe no longer felt safe. Open areas became dangerous. Roads became traps. Tree lines became suspicious. Soldiers began to question every movement. If they stood up, were they being watched? If they crossed a clearing, would they make it across? If they stopped to rest, had they already been seen? This uncertainty is exhausting. A soldier can prepare for an enemy he sees. He can aim at a trench. He can return fire toward a muzzle flash. He can follow orders toward a visible objective. But how do you fight someone you cannot locate? How do you attack a position when you don't know where it is? How do you stay calm when the forest itself feels alive? This is what made Simo so feared. It was not only the number of men attributed to him, it was the atmosphere he created, the feeling that nowhere was fully safe, the feeling that the snow was hiding something, the feeling that silence was not peace. It was waiting. For the soldiers moving through those forests, the danger was not dramatic, it was quiet, it was patient, it was invisible, and that kind of fear spreads quickly. One story becomes two stories become rumors, rumors become a legend, and soon the man in the snow is no longer just a soldier, he becomes a shadow, a warning, a name spoken with fear, the White Death. Search teams were sent, counter positions were prepared, artillery was used to strike suspected locations. The logic was simple. If they could not find him directly, they would try to disrupt the areas where he might be hiding. But this was the problem. There was rarely anything obvious to target. No clear bunker, no fixed tower, no repeated pattern that made him easy to predict. The terrain protected him, the weather protected him, his discipline protected him, and every failed attempt added to the legend. Imagine trying to locate one man in a frozen forest, a man dressed in white, a man who understands the terrain, a man who does not move unless he has to, a man who leaves as little trace as possible. The battlefield is huge, the visibility is poor, the cold is brutal, and every minute spent searching is another minute spent exposed. That is what made the situation so difficult. Finding him meant entering the environment where he was strongest. It meant moving through snow that slowed you down. It meant crossing spaces where you could be seen before you saw anything. It meant fighting on his terms. And in war, fighting on the enemy's terms is one of the worst positions to be in. But no soldier is untouchable. Late in the conflict, Simo Häyhä was seriously wounded. A single moment changed everything. After weeks in one of the harshest battlefields of the war, his time on the front ended violently. He was evacuated. For a time, he was between life and death. The man who had become almost invisible in the snow was suddenly gone from the battlefield. And then, not long after, the winter war came to an end. When Simo woke, the war was over. He had survived. But survival did not mean he returned unchanged. His injuries were severe. His face was permanently affected. The war had left its mark on him, as it did on everyone who lived through it. But unlike the legend that grew around his name, Simo himself did not seem interested in becoming a myth. After the war, he returned to a quiet life. He hunted, he farmed, he lived far from the battlefield that had made him famous. He did not build his identity around the fear others had of him. He simply continued living. And maybe that is one of the most striking things about his story. The world remembered him as the White Death. But he was also a farmer, a hunter, a quiet man from Finland, a man shaped by his environment, a man who survived something almost impossible.